We're in a series on Proverbs, and thank you to Joe for filling in so capably last week, and Don for teaching class for Steve. We have a talented group here. We're studying Proverbs because Proverbs has a wisdom for life that works. And it's really important that we understand that just because we believe in Jesus doesn't mean that we're necessarily living the way that Jesus has called us to live. And it's also important for us to understand that as we grow in our faith, we gain more wisdom and we learn to live in ways that reflect Jesus and God even better in our lives. And so Proverbs is an important book because it gives you some of the wisdom that you need to understand life, some of the wisdom you need to relate to others, some of the wisdom that you need to protect your own life, some of the wisdom you need to deal with difficult situations. There's clues to all this in the book of Proverbs. And so we're going to talk about sort of a difficult subject today, and it's going to begin in Proverbs chapter 5, if you have your Bibles. Verse 1 through 6. My son, be attentive to my wisdom and incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she's bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it. So we're going to talk about sex today. And, I wasn't real comfortable thinking about that all week, that I was going to have to get up here and talk about it. But we need to talk about it. The Bible speaks very openly about sex, and the world speaks very loudly about sex. You can't miss it these days. It's on the TV, it's on the internet, it's on your phone. You can't get away from it. And you can't, by the way, protect your kids from it for long enough. They're going to run into it, and if you don't share what the good principles are about sex with your kids, they're going to learn it from somewhere else. I remember when Monica and I were raising our kids, we got a set of books that told us how, as Christians, to share about sex with our kids and at what age to share what. And so it's important that we talk about sex. And the world's view of sex is a distorted view. It's a view that sex is for personal gratification, and that you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't affect anyone else, and that it's a private matter that no one has any business asking you about. But that's not what the Bible teaches about sex. But because of the world's distorted view of sex, here's a few statistics that I want to share with you. 85% of men have premarital sex. 25% of men and 15% of women commit adultery. Cohabitation, living and not being married, grew from 6 million to 17 million over the last 20 years. So that's how much that's changed in our culture. And porn is a major problem in our culture. I want to read to you a little bit about what porn is doing in our culture and how many people are involved in it. These are some statistics I got from a site that does research online. 40 million U.S. adults regularly visit porn sites, and 35% of all internet downloads are porn-related. The average age for the first exposure to pornography is 13, and 50% of partnerships suffer due to pornography. Notably, 20% of men have accessed porn at work, and 115 billion adult content searches were made worldwide in 2019. Furthermore, 68% of young adult males and 18% of females use porn weekly. Remarkably, 79% of American men have viewed porn during their lifetime, as have 64% of Christian males and 15% of Christian females monthly. Around 9% report an addiction to online porn, while 20% of users feel controlled by their sexual desires from excessive use of porn. Lastly, 32% believe this habit has become addictive or problematic, contributing to 56% of divorce cases involving obsessive interest in such sites. These statistics underscore the importance of understanding the magnitude of this issue. It's out of control. You can't get away from it. We were fortunate because when our kids first started getting phones and stuff, it wasn't as prevalent then. But now it's all over the place. If I had kids today, I'd be hesitant to give them phones. And when I did, I'd want to put some sort of guidelines or some sort of software that controlled it. Because when this stuff gets into your mind as young as 13, it's hard to mitigate the consequences and effect that it has on your soul. And here's the problem. Me and Monica were talking about this, and for the world, it's just a physical thing. It's nobody's business. It's like having a drink of coffee. It's like going out and getting a massage. There's nothing to it, but the Bible says there's a lot more to sex. In Proverbs chapter 5, verse 4 and 6, or verse 5 and 6 rather, it says this, and this is the way of the world. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life, and her ways wander, and she does not know it. And it's talking about the adulteress here, and it says that she's headed towards death. She doesn't even know it. And that's the world. The world has no clue that this is going to kill your soul. And it's because they reject the clear biblical teaching about the purpose of sex that God has planned for all of us. And God is the one who made sex. And he made us and gave us sexual desires. So sex itself is good, but it's good in the context of God's plan for sex within the confines of marriage between a man and a woman. And so what you learn when you study Proverbs is this, that sexual folly will destroy your life. Sexual wisdom will satisfy your sexual desire, but Christ is better than sex because Christ is true life and will someday unite you with God. But sex is a great temptation, and it's one that Satan uses very effectively. In Proverbs 5, verse 3, it says, "For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil." So the temptation is very appealing. Now, this Proverbs here is about a father talking to a son. Some of that may just be the way that he's personifying the temptation of sex. Some of this may be cultural. There's no doubt, by the way, that men struggle with this more than women. 80+% of the ones that look at porn are men. Less than 20% of the women do. And so this is a bigger problem for men, but let's be honest, in our culture, it's a problem for both sexes, male and female. And so when you look here and think of an adulteress, I want you to think of the temptress or the tempter, because what we have here is a tempter and one that's being tempted. And we know that the tempter is Satan, and Satan is full of lies, and they drip honey. In John 8:44, it says that Satan is a murderer and a liar. But the appeal of sex is something that will sort of ooze out at you. It excites you. And Satan tells you, listen, whatever you do in your mind, your heart is okay. You're not hurting anybody. It's not hurting anyone. And so this secret sin is all right as long as you keep it secret. But here's what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. He says, "But I tell you that everyone that looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And so we need to realize that this sexual sin is something that is very serious, and it's something that happens inside of us before it comes out, and it's already sinned. It's like he says that people say that if you murder, it's a sin, but he said, no, if you hate, it's a sin. Well, the same principle is here with adultery or sexual sin. You may say, well, if I commit it, it's a sin. No, if you obsess about it and you think about it and you fantasize about it and you start getting caught up in it, it's already destroying your soul. And so it's really important that we guard ourselves. But Satan is going to tell you it's okay if it's secret and no one's involved. Well, here's another trick of Satan's. In Proverbs chapter 7, we have another temptress. And it starts in verse 10 and says, "And behold, the woman meets him dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She's loud and wayward, and her feet do not stay at her home. Now in the street and now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with a bowed face she says to him," now listen to what she says. This young man's walking a place he shouldn't be. I know that from earlier in the chapter. She comes out and meets him and kisses him, and she says, "I had to offer sacrifice today, and I paid my vows." You know what she says? "I just came out of church. I just came out of church, and I came out, and I ran into you. It must have been exactly what God had intended for us." But it's a lie. Because her husband is away, and he's not married, and she's just there to entice him. But one of the lies that Satan will tell you, and I've heard this so many times in people that decide they want to leave their mate, is, "Well, you know what? I never loved him to begin with. I don't know what I was thinking. That was a mistake. I knew it the day I got married." And it's just an excuse not to keep the commitment that we have before God. Now, I want to say this up front. I know that there's people in here that have been divorced, and I believe that God forgives that sin. And it may not have even been your fault. And if it was, God can still forgive that sin. But Jesus says, go and sin no more. So you don't want to keep making the same mistake over and over again. And so what he calls us to do is to be faithful to our vows. And Satan may tell you, "Oh, well, you just married the wrong person anyhow." Or, "This is the person God intended you to meet. They just walked down the street because this one's more exciting." And Satan will put these sort of lies in our life to try and tempt us. And the problem is, with all of us, is that sex has a very powerful appeal. And on TV and on the internet and on billboards and in text, I'm sure this has happened. I'll get a text. It's crazy these days. You get a text, "Well, hello, Kevin. Did you get the picture I sent you?" And I go, "Delete and report." You know, I got that one down. Delete and report. But we're so caught up in sex these days that it's probably some ugly guy texting me. But we still get caught up in it. We still get caught up in it because sex has such a strong appeal to us. And we have these desires that God gave us, but they have to be channeled in the right way. In James 1:14-15, it says that, "And every person is tempted when they are lured and enticed by their own desires." So let's understand what sin is. Sin is when we are lured and enticed by our own desires. And so there's a danger there because sex has a lot of appeal to it. But then it goes on to say this, that desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, produces forth death. And so having the desire is something God gave us, but then using it the way God has taught us to use it rather than letting it get control of us and letting it get in our minds and letting it start taking control of the way we behave, when that happens, it leads to death. And part of the problem is we have this sort of disease that we're never happy with what we have. That's part of the problem. I heard this great story, and I apologize ahead of time that it's sort of directed towards females, but it's because Joyce Myers taught it. She was preaching to a bunch of women, and here's what she said. She said, "Have you heard of that new store they opened in New York called the Husband Store?" And she said, "It's a great store. There's 6 floors to it, and the only rule is when you go in shopping for a husband, if you leave one floor and go to the next, you can't go back." And so she said that a lady went into the first floor, and there were all these husbands in there, and every one of them had a job. And she thought, well, that's good, but I wonder what's on the second floor. So she went up to the second floor, and there were signs there. All these men have a job, and they love children. And she thought, this is getting better. I need to find out what's on the third floor. So she went to the third floor, and it said all these husbands have a job, they love children, and they do housework. She thought, this is getting too good to be true. She said, I got to try the fourth floor. So she went to the fourth floor, and the fourth floor, well, they had a job, they love children, they do housework, and they were good looking. I mean, it's just getting better and better as it goes. And so she thought, I got to go to the fifth floor. And she went to the fifth floor, and it said, well, they have a job, they love children, they do housework, they're good looking, and they're romantic. And you'd think she'd stop there, but she thought, why should I settle? Let's go to floor number 6. And she got up to floor number 6 and said, you're the 40 millionth customer to come up here, and there are no husbands on this floor. And you can't go back. And, that's a little bit the way we are. We keep thinking there's something a little bit better out there, and we don't trust that God gave us what we need. Satan is sneaky that way, but here's the problem. When we get caught up with sex, when we let it begin to obsess or take control of our minds, then there are consequences to our lives, and some of them are pretty significant, and they're bitter consequences. And so right here back in Proverbs chapter 5, it says this. It says, so verse 3, the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she's bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. There's a bitterness that comes when we leave the confines of safety of sex the way God intends for it to be in our life. And those who get caught up in sex outside of God's will, oftentimes they lie, they cover up. You've seen it all over the news and TV all the time, politicians that are living double lives, and they're paying off their mistresses to hide it. It's been going on for years. But those things tend to come out. The truth tends to be found out. God surfaces these things, and when they come up, they destroy our lives, and they're bitter. And it says in verse 11, or we'll start in verse 9, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless, lest strangers take their fill of your strength and labors go to the house of a foreigner. So basically, it's describing a slave here. They're working and someone else is getting all the fruit. And it says, when you are enticed by sex, you're going to give the best of your life to somebody else. And you're going to become a slave. In Romans 7, Paul talks about slavery, and he says, here's what it is. You do what you don't want to do. Or I might take it a step further. You do what you don't want to do. You're trapped and you can't get out. You want to get out and you can't. And sometimes you just do what you know you shouldn't do. That's being a slave. You know what's right, but you do what's wrong anyhow because you're caught up in it and you can't get out. And so what happens is sex has this allure, but when you get caught up in it, it enslaves you and it will steal from you. And you won't be able to stop those thoughts anymore. You won't be able to stop the crash of your family as it gets destroyed down the road. It's a very difficult thing that happens when we get caught up and enslaved by this. And not only that, but it steals true pleasure from us. For those who get caught up in internet or fantasy or porn, what happens is that becomes the satisfaction of their sexual desires, and it's fake sex. We've heard of fake news. It's fake sex. It's not even the real thing. And people are caught up in some sort of mirage that Satan has portrayed for them, and it's dangerous. And one of the main reasons it's dangerous, look at verse 14. It says, I'm at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. So this person now is embarrassed. They're shamed in front of their own group of people that trusted them, that believed in them, that wanted to support them. Now they're ashamed in the body or the church for us. But not only are they ashamed, but this sin separates us from God. Bruce Wilkinson, who wrote the book, The Prayer of Jabez, says this about sexual immorality. He says, it's a threshold sin. On one side of the threshold is immorality. On the other is purity. On one side are guilt, lying, deceit, addiction, and shame. And on the other side are freedom, honesty, transparency, liberty, and a clear conscience. And believers who are in bondage to immorality find that unless they experience victory in this area, they cannot grow in holiness or serve the Lord with passion and power. So here's what happens when any of us get trapped by any sort of sin, but especially sexual sin. You may want to connect with God, but something keeps you from doing that. And he says from talking to people that are caught up in it, that they report that they just can't come to God, that they try and come to God, and for some reason they feel separated from God, and reading the Bible and doing their devotions just doesn't bring them to God the way they want, because they're torn up with the guilt of knowing that they haven't let go of a sin. And so there are bitter consequences to letting sex grab a hold of your life in a way that isn't the way that God intended for it. So what it tells us to do is keep far away from it. And so in Proverbs, right here it says in 7, "And now, O sons, listen to me." 5:7, "Do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house." So he's pretty clear what you need to do is stay away. In 1 Corinthians 6:18, it says this, it says, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but the sexually immoral person commits sins to their body." They commit sins in the body. In fact, if you back up to verse 16, it says that anyone who gets with an adulteress becomes one with her. There's something about sex that bonds us, not just at a physical level, but it's a spiritual level. What you do in the body matters. Your spirit goes right with you, and sex and marriage is meant to be intimate. That's another thing. When Monica and I were talking, she said, it's lost all its intimacy in the world. It's just a physical act now. But God intends it to be something very special between a husband and wife that bonds them not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually at the same time. And so what we're told is stay far away from that temptation. Any of us, by the way, could fall prey to the temptation. Don't think you're above it. If you think you're above it, then you're ripe for Satan's picking. You need to always have your guard up. In Ephesians 5, verse 3, it says this. It says that sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness should not even be named among you as is proper for saints. I love the NIV. It says there shouldn't even be a hint of it. You shouldn't joke about it. You shouldn't make light of it. And because when you do that, you open the door for Satan to come into your life. And it doesn't take much. Flirting starts out innocent, but it can end up in sin. One of the things that happened when Monica and I first got married, I was a campus minister, and I was single. And I went out to lunch with all these people from my campus ministry, male and female. And I kept doing that after we got married till we found out that one of our young marrieds who was helping me disciple the college kids had fallen in love with a young college girl because he had been discipling her and going to lunch with her. And we made some rules for each other about who we could go to lunch with and how close we could get to somebody from the opposite sex because we wanted to protect our marriage. Did you know that most affairs, I got this out of a book I read years ago called How to Affair-Proof Your Marriage. Most affairs, the first two places they happen, the first one didn't surprise me, the second one did. The first one is work. Why is that? Because you're side by side to somebody. You're looking them in the eye. You get to know them. You appreciate them. You become friends. And so some people are just out after the sex, but a lot of us have higher standards than that, but you can get caught up in an emotional relationship with someone that leads where it shouldn't lead. And so one of the things Monica and I decided is we were going to stop the emotional relationship from beginning to start with. And that way we would protect ourselves. You shouldn't be overly emotionally connected to someone from the opposite sex. I don't think it's appropriate if you're married. And so the second place that they occur, and this one surprised me, work is number one. Number two is family. And I'm like, are you serious? Yeah, people go to family reunions, they hang out, you don't think anything of it, you get really close to somebody, and then a husband and wife leave their mate in the family and they get together. It happens all the time. And so stay away from those places and protect yourself. Draw some healthy boundaries. But remember this, God's gift of sex is to us. It's God's gift. I met Jeff for breakfast this week. We were talking a little bit about adult education, and he said, well, I don't understand why Proverbs is in there. It's just Solomon wrote it, and Solomon wasn't a very good example. And so we were having that talk. Well, Jeff, I don't understand why Song of Solomon is in there. You know? I mean, it is pretty explicit. And yet Song of Solomon is in there. And he says some similar stuff right here. He says in verse 18, or we'll start in 15. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Verse 17, let them be for yourself alone, not for strangers with you. And let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. And we'll just stop right there. And I'm not going to quote Song of Solomon's because it'd be hard to miss any of those passages. They're all over in there. But God intended sex to be for reproduction, sex to be for intimacy, and he intended sex for pleasure. So much so that Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:9, he says, it's better to marry than to burn. In other words, if sex is something that you need in your life, marry. That's the way that God designed for sex to be pleasurable and safe, and according to his plan is in marriage. But don't not marry and then let sex get a hold of you and you're going to start having sex outside of marriage. That will bring bitter consequences. And so it's important, by the way, that if you are married, that you don't disregard the importance of sex in your marriage. That sounds strange to say, but I have counseled multiple couples that at some point in time, they just quit having sex. And there was one gentleman, and he and his wife were retired, and he stayed with her to the end, but boy, he struggled because she refused to have sex with him anymore. And here's what the Bible says about this in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 3, and another passage I'm uncomfortable to read, but it's in the Bible. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So the Bible says that a husband and wife should not deprive one another. So if you're a husband, don't deprive your wife of sex. It's a sin. If you're a wife, don't deprive your husband of sex. It's actually a sin. But what y'all should do is talk about it. I think too many couples, they don't even talk about it, but it should be done in the context of intimacy, and it should be done because God has given you that, so you have to talk about it. Remember, sex is not just selfish. Sex is giving. And so you should talk about how to please your mate and have honest conversations about what each of you are comfortable with and try and respect that. And don't seek it elsewhere, or you will incur judgment. Realize that your spouse is the only morally legitimate place to get it, and it's the only place that you'll have the intimacy that God intends for you to have is in the context of this marriage relationship. Now, in Proverbs 5, it says this. Let's read this first. It says this in verse 21. For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. Anything you do, God knows. Anything you're thinking, God already heard it. God sees your behavior. He knows what's in your heart and mind. So don't deceive yourself thinking that there is no such thing as secret sin. It may be secret because I don't know it or your neighbor doesn't know it, but God knows it. And so realize also that God loves you and he's going to discipline you. In fact, going back up here, it says in verse 12, how I hated discipline and my heart despised reproof. God's going to give you these clues that you're ruining your life, that the pleasure you want isn't there anymore, that this is sucking away your relationship with God and putting up barriers. He's going to give you all these little clues, but you have to be willing to listen to them. I think sometimes people are just afraid that they're not going to get the pleasure they want if they do it God's way, or that God won't satisfy all their needs, or that God will somehow deprive them of something. Let me tell you, that's a lie that comes straight from Satan. You'll get everything you ever wanted and more if you do it God's way. And if you keep doing it Satan's way long enough, you're going to know I'm right. At the early times, it's appealing, but when it captures you and entraps you, it will enslave you and it will be bitter at the end. And I've wondered sometimes why people, just don't come back to God. I was playing golf Friday night, and I wasn't playing with Wayne this time. I was playing with Rhonda Yonker and John and Ryan Chardine. And so we went out about 6:30, and we got to playing. This cart pulled up right behind us and said, "What time's your tee time?" I said, "Well, we're playing at 6:15. They go, "Oh, well, we're 6:30. We're after y'all. We may go look at the back nine." And they went off, and I told Ron and John, I said, "I think this is the guy that threatened to beat my face in 2 weeks ago." But he went off. But he came back. And he said, "Yeah, there's people on the back nine. We're going to have to go after y'all." And I started looking at him. He had a hat on, and he didn't have a hat on the other day. And he started talking to me. The more he talked to me, I thought, that's that guy. Well, you know what I wanted to do? Well, it did help. Ron and John were with me, but I just wanted really to say, "Hey, are you okay? Can we make up and be friends and shake hands? I forgive you." But I didn't. I was a little uncomfortable, and so we went playing. They said, "Are you sure?" "Oh, yeah, that's the guy." And they were right behind us, and we got to 1, and we got to 2, and I saw them as we went to 3. They were on hole 2. Well, all of a sudden, they disappeared. We never saw them again. And Ron said, "I trust you. He didn't want to talk to you. He recognized you, and he's out of there," and he's probably right. Sometimes we just get so ashamed or caught up in our guilt, we run from God. We run from doing the things we know we ought to do. We're afraid he won't take us back. We're afraid we've gone too far down this path for too long to change. I talked to somebody I care about deeply on the phone just the other night and pleaded with them to go back to church. And they said, "I am going to go back. I've just made so many mistakes." And Satan uses those mistakes to tell you you're not good enough, you're not sincere, don't try it. But God wants you back. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, "Come to me, all ye who labor and are heavy burdened, because I will give you rest." You just have to trust that Jesus will do what he says he's going to do. In Romans 7:24, Paul says, "Who will deliver me from this body of death?" And he goes on to say, "Jesus will deliver me from this body of death." Don't let Satan be the king of your heart. Let Jesus be the king of your heart. Because he's a good Father. He'll heal you. He'll take you back the way you are, and he'll give you the joy he has in mind before you were even born to give you through your faith in him. If we can encourage you in any way, if we can pray for you, we always invite you to come while we stand